So what we're going to do now is take a look at configuring our Redux store. Now I've completely rewritten and I'm re-recording this entire section 7. In the previous version of this course, I think I made it a little bit too complicated too quickly, and I went from A to B as fast as possible to get this set up, and I think I lost a few people along the way. So what we're going to do is break this down into the individual components that make up our React and Redux configuration, and we'll do the simplest thing we can to prove that this is working, and hopefully you'll get a good understanding of the flow of what we're doing here. Now there's a couple of pieces that we need inside here. First of all, we're using Redux, of course, and the latest version at the time of recording is 4.0.1. Now we're also using React Redux, and this provides us with the ability to connect our application to our Redux store. This provides our bindings that we need. Now there's a version warning here, and the one that I've got is 5.1.1, which is the latest version in the 5 branch of React Redux. Now I'm not using the latest version of this one because the latest version will definitely give us problems. Not with React Redux itself, but with React Redux Firebase. And if you did use the latest version of this, you will be absolutely fine right up until the point where we start connecting Firestore and Firebase to our application. That's when it's going to start to go wrong. Now, any version above or 6 or above of React Redux, because they've changed the internals of how React Redux works, React Redux Firebase also is being changed to accommodate that, but at the moment that's on version 3 alpha. And the author of React Redux Firebase has removed some integrations that we use with Redux Thunks that we'll come to use later on. And he's thinking about either putting these integrations back in or replacing it with something better. But at the moment it's still a work in progress, so we can't actually use that on our course at the moment. So what I would highly recommend, and in fact it's kind of essential, that you stick with the latest version in React Redux in order to complete this application. Otherwise you're going to have a bunch of problems when it comes to React Redux Firebase. They're not impossible to work around, but you'd be writing very different code to that which is demonstrated on this course. And it's never a good idea to use alpha versions of anything, especially not on a training course, especially not for applications going into production, because they're liable to significant change. Anyway, that's the version warnings out the way. And what I want to do is just show you the pieces that we're working on here in this particular part. Now, if we go back to our Redux React flow diagram, the parts we're working on now is, first of all, we're going to configure our store. Now, our store contains the states for our application. And the only way that we can update our store and make changes to the application state in our store is via a reducer. And a reducer contains functions that update the store state. And what we'll be doing very simply first of all is creating a reducer that has some initial state, and this state will be passed into our store. Now what we'll also do in this section is we'll configure the provider, and the provider comes from React Redux, and this is what allows us to connect our application to the Redux store. So we're working on 3 pieces in this particular lesson, and let's go and get these configured. Now the first thing we'll do is we'll create our store, and inside our app I'm just going to create a new folder called store, and inside here we'll create a new file and we'll call it configure.store.js. Now what we want in here is a function, and we'll say export const, and we'll say configure store that takes no parameters, and we'll add a variable called store, and we'll set this equal to create store. And let's see if we can get this from Redux, and we kind of can. It's going to bring in quite a funky looking path here, so I'm just going to accept this anyway. And okay, we don't need all of that. We can get this directly from Redux because Node Modules is one of the places it's going to look to try and find the imports, and obviously we have Redux available inside Node Modules. So we'll create our store, and our store takes one required argument, which is going to be our reducer, and it takes a second argument, which is a store enhancer, but we're not going to worry about that right now. But what we need to pass into this is a reducer, which we'll create very soon, but then we'll just return the store. So we need a reducer to pass into this, and I'm just going to go back into features, into test area. I'm going to create a new file and call this one test reducer.js. Now this reducer is going to have no functions in it right now, but what we are going to give it is some initial state. And this is going to be an object that contains a single property called data, and data is going to be set to 42. And what we'll do is we'll create a reducer, so we'll say const test reducer equals, and then we'll pass in the state and set this equal to the initial state that we've just created above. And then all we're going to do here is return the state. And then we just need to export default test reducer so that we can use it in our store configuration. Really simple right now. And we'll go back to our store and pass in our test reducer. And this should automatically import it inside here as well. So what we need to do now is connect this store to our application, and that's where the provider comes in. And we'll add the provider inside our index.js file. And what we're going to do is wrap this provider around our application. So I'll just come into the render method and see if I can get this automatically imported. And that's not going to happen, but I'll just create the provider and cut the browser router and paste it inside here. I'll see if I can automatically import, and it doesn't look like that's feasible. We only need to do this once, so I'm just going to import provider from React Redux. Now what we need to pass to our provider, and I'll just reformat this to tidy it up. What we need to pass to our provider is our store instance. So what we'll do is we'll create a variable called store, and we'll set this equal to configure store, which we created inside our store configuration. And then it's just a case of passing our provider, the store, as a prop. And we'll say store equals store. Now if we go and take a look at our application right now, and I'll just go into the Redux, the React DevTools, and if we take a look at the top level of our application, which is the provider, we can see that we now have our store property. And our store property comes with 4 functions: dispatch, getState, replace reducer, and subscribe. And what we can do is, right now, we can take a look at this particular function, and we can log the state out into our console. So back in index.js, all I'm going to do is say console.log, and I'll say store.getState, and add the parentheses. And if we go and take a look in the browser, what we should find is that we have the contents of our store, and this is our Redux store contents. Really simple just now, just simply data and 42. And the reason this data is available in our store is because we've passed our reducer to our store, and our test reducer has some initial states that we're returning, and this is what is now available in our store. And just to recap what we've done here, we've now configured a test reducer that passes some initial states to our store, and our store is connected to our application via a provider. And what we're going to look at next is how we can get the data from the store into our components. And to do that, we're going to take a look at the next part of this, which is mapping the state of our store to the properties in our components. And we'll look at that next.